it. Everywhere you look, you see the future of aviation. You see the sleek, futuristic Airbus A350. You see the brand new, fuel-efficient A321 Neo. Everything feels premium, modern, and expensive. But then you look at the next gate. Sitting there is a small, strange-looking plane. It has its engines at the back, near the tail. It's loud, it's old, and it looks like a time traveler from the 90s. This is the Boeing 717. And here is the big question. Delta calls itself America's premium airline. They spend billions of dollars on new technology. So why is the backbone of their short-haul fleet a plane that competitors like Southwest sent to the scrapyard 10 years ago? You might think it is just nostalgia, or maybe a mistake. But it is not. In fact, keeping this old guzzler in the sky is actually one of the smartest, most calculated financial moves in modern aviation history. Let's find out why. But first, hit the like and subscribe button. This simple action is vital for me. Thank you very much. Part 1. Boeing's adopted son. First, we need to clear up a common misunderstanding. If you look at the safety card in the seat pocket, it says Boeing 717. But if we are being honest, this isn't a real Boeing plane. It was actually born as the McDonnell Douglas MD-95. It was the last great design from the legendary creators of the DC-9. But in 1997, Boeing bought McDonnell Douglas. They took the MD-95, slapped a Boeing logo on it, and renamed it the 717. But here is the sad part. Boeing didn't really want this plane. Why? Because they already had their own small plane, the 737-600. They didn't want the 717 to compete with their own baby. So Boeing killed the project very quickly. In the end, only 156 of these planes were ever built. To give you some context, there are over 11,000 Boeing 737s. The 717 is incredibly rare. And this is where it gets interesting. Delta owns or leases more than a half of all 717s left in the world. Basically, Delta is practically the only major airline keeping this rare bird alive. Part 2. The logic of free plane. So here is the big economic mystery. Everyone knows the new Airbus A320 is a masterpiece. It is modern, light, and it burns about 20% less fuel than the old 717. On paper, the A320 wins easily. But there is a trap, the price tag. A brand new A320 costs about $35 to $40 million. Even if you don't buy it, leasing one requires a massive payment every single month. Now let's look at the 717. Delta bought most of these planes almost for free. When Southwest Airlines bought AirTran, they hated the 717s and wanted them to gone immediately. Delta happily picked them up for pennies on the dollar. This changes the math completely. It comes down to capital cost versus operational cost. Think of it like a car. If you have a brand new car, you have a huge monthly payment. But if you drive an old car that is fully paid off, you don't have that monthly bill. Since your car costs you zero, you don't mind if it uses a little extra gas. That is Delta's secret. Because the 717s are fully paid off, they don't lose money when they are sitting on the ground. If a new A320 sits at the gate doing nothing, it is burning cash because of the expensive lease. But if a 717 sits at the gate, it costs Delta almost nothing. This gives them incredible flexibility. Part 3. The secret weapon. Delta Tech Ops. Usually, airlines are terrified of old planes. Why? Because maintenance is a nightmare. When a 25-year-old part breaks, it is hard to find and very expensive to replace. If you are a normal airline, this destroys your profit. But Delta is not a normal airline. They have a secret weapon called Delta Tech Ops. While other airlines have to pay third-party companies a huge amount of money to fix their engines and airframes, Delta does it in-house. They don't need to hunt for expensive rare parts. They have the skills to refurbish old parts themselves. Or they simply take what they need from donor planes that they bought just for spare parts. Because they control the repairs, keeping the 717 fleet alive costs them pennies compared to what it would cost to anyone else. Part 4. The perfect niche and the tank factor. So where does Delta actually fly these old planes? They don't fly across the ocean. They fly very short routes, often just 40 to 60 minutes. Think of a flight from Atlanta to Charlotte. In the aviation world, these are called high-cycle operations. And this is where the logic gets even stronger. You see, a modern plane like the A320 is incredibly efficient when it is cruising high in the sky. But on a 40-minute flight, the plane barely reaches cruising altitude before it has to come back down. Because of this, the new A320 doesn't have time to use its fuel-saving technology. On short hops, the fuel difference between an old 717 and the new A320 is actually very small. Also, short flights are hard on airplanes. Taking off and landing 4 or 6 times a day puts a lot of stress on the metal. It wears the plane out quickly. Why would you ruin a shiny, expensive, brand new jet on these rough, short flights? It makes no sense. The 717, however, is built like a tank. It was designed for this abuse. Plus, its engines, the Rolls-Royce BR715s, they are gold standard of reliability. While modern engines are sensitive and complex, these old engines just keep working, day after day. Part 5. The crisis of new planes. Here's the biggest plot twist of the story. Delta actually had a plan to retire the 717 fleet. They placed a huge order to the Airbus A320, intending it to take over these routes. It seemed like a perfect plan. But there was a problem they didn't expect. The A320 used high-tech engines from Pratt & Whitney, called the GFT. While these engines are efficient, they have suffered from serious reliability issues. They require frequent inspections and often need long, complex repairs. This created a disaster for many airlines. Brand new A320s are often forced to sit on the ground waiting for engine fixes. So here is the ultimate irony. The plane that was supposed to be scrapped, the 717, is now the hero of the fleet. It is saving Delta's schedule, while the shiny modern jet are stuck in the hangar with engine problems. This old, obsolete 717 is flying every day without complaints. In the strange turn of events, the old technology turned out to be more reliable than the new. Part 6. What about the passengers? You might think that flying on an old, cheap plane means a bad experience for you. But actually, the opposite is true. Frequent flyers often love the 717 more than modern jets. First, there is the seating layout. Most narrow-body planes like the Boeing 737 or Airbus A320 have 3-to-3 setup. This means there are 2 terrible middle seats in every row. But the 717 is different. It uses a 2-3 layout. There is only 1 middle seat per row. If you are traveling as a couple and you pick the left side, you have the whole row to yourself. No strangers next to you. Second, it is surprisingly comfortable. Because the engines are located all the way at the back of the plane, the front of the cabin is incredibly quiet. It is one of the most peaceful riders in the sky. Finally, Delta didn't just leave these planes to look old. They completely updated the interiors. When you step on board, you see new seats, modern lighting, power outlets, and high-speed Wi-Fi. Most passengers sit down, connect their phones, and have no idea they are flying on a machine built in the last century. Final, the long goodbye. In the end, the Boeing 717 is much more than just an old airplane. It is a true workhorse. It allows Delta to make a profit on routes where other airplanes might lose money. It survives because it is simple, tough, and fully paid off. So when it finally leaves the skies, Delta keeps pushing the day back. Current estimates say these planes will keep flying until at least 2030. But when the last 717 finally retires, it will be a sad day for aviation enthusiasts. It will mark the end of an era, the end of the T-tail jets in major American skies. But what about you? Have you ever flown on a Delta 717? Did you notice the quiet cabin or the 2-3 seating? Or did it just feel like any other flight? Let me know in the comments below. If you learned something new today, hitting the subscribe button is the best way to support me. As a new channel, every subscriber truly counts and motivates me to create better stories. Click here to watch the next video. Thanks for watching and see you next time. I found a weird abandoned version B787-3, and it was a real project, by the way. Could you imagine like 757 and 787 had a baby? It's literally what I've accidentally found surfing the internet. It is for sure a weird concept, because just why would you ever need a wide body which can fly only 5,000 miles? So today we will find this out. Actually, the intended range was even shorter. We are talking about a Dreamliner optimized for routes as short as 200 nautical miles. A specialized machine designed to act like a city bus, taking off and landing up to 10 times a day. This wasn't just a paper plane. It has 43 firm orders. It had a completely unique wing structure that looked nothing like the 787 we know today. And it was killed not by a crash, but by the concrete geometry of Japanese airports and the brutal physics of structural weight. In the next 15 minutes, we are going to dig into the hidden specification, the aerodynamic compromises, and the exact economic data that turned this plane into a ghost. But before we open the technical manuals, please hit this like button and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy deep engineering analysis. It helps me a lot. Now let's look at the numbers. Part 1. The anatomy of a mutant. To understand why this plane failed, we first need to understand what it actually was. Because from the outside, the fuselage of the 787-3 was identical to the standard 787-8. Same length, same composite barrel, same passenger capacity. But underneath the skin, it was a completely different animal. Let's look at the hidden numbers. The most critical difference was the MTOW, maximum takeoff weight. The standard 787-8 has an MTOW of roughly 228 tons. The 787-3, it was capped at just 165 tons. That is a 28% reduction. Why would Boeing deliberately cripple their own aircraft? Two reasons: landing fees and structural life. Airport fees are often calculated based on maximum certified weight. Airlines operating 45-minute flights would be paying long-haul prices for short hops. However, notice the MZFW, max zero fuel weight. It remained exactly the same, as 161 tons. The 787-3 could carry the exact same heavy payload of passengers and cargo as the long-range version. It just couldn't carry the fuel to get them very far. It was a tank designed to be full of people, but empty of gas. But the real engineering crime, or innovation, depending on how you look at it, was the wing. The standard Dreamliner wing is the masterpiece of aerodynamics. It spans 60.1 meters and features those iconic racked wingtips. These sweep back to reduce drag during high-speed cruise at Mach 85. They are elegant, efficient, and huge. The 787-3 wing was chopped, literally. Boeing engineers reduced the span to 51.7 meters, and because they removed those efficient ranked tips, they had to bolt on massive vertical blended winglets, similar what you see on a 737 or 767. Now let's get into the physics. Why is a shorter wing a problem? It comes down to induced drag defined by this formula. Look at the denominator, b squared. That is your wingspan squared. Mathematically, cutting the wing from 60 meters to 52 meters theoretically increases induced drag by 25 to 30% for the same lift. This is why the 787-3 needed those vertical winglets. They weren't a stylistic choice. They were a necessary aerodynamic crutch, or fence, to stop high-pressure air from curling over the wingtip and destroying the lift efficiency entirely. So we have a heavy wide body with clipped wings, high drag and reduced fuel capacity. Why on earth did Boeing build this Frankenstein? The answer lies in the concrete geometry of two specific airports in Japan. Part 2. The Japanese trap and high cycle hull. The 787-3 wasn't designed strictly for the sky. It was designed for the ground. Specifically the concrete aprons of Tokyo Haneda and Osaka Itami. These aren't just airports. They are high-speed mass transit hubs. In Japan, domestic routes like Tokyo to Sapporo operate with high frequency of a subway line, often seeing 50 widebody flights a day. But there was a physical problem. The domestic terminals in Japan were built around ICAO Code D standards. This code limits aircraft wingspan to exactly 52 meters, the size of a Boeing 767-300 or the Airbus A300. If ANA or GAL tried to park a standard 787-8 with its 60-meter wingspan at these domestic gates, it would cause what is known as wingtip overlap. Essentially, one Dreamliner would block the gates on either side of it, creating dead zones. In an airport running at 99% capacity, losing two gates just to park one plane is an operational disaster. This is why the 787-3's wings were clipped to that magic number, 51.7 meters. It was the maximum amount of airplane you could physically fit into the parking slot. But filling into the gate was only half the battle. The mission profile was the other half. A standard long-haul aircraft flies for 12 hours, lands and resets. It performs one flight cycle per day. The 787-3 was built for high cycle operations. We are talking about flight times of 45 to 90 minutes, with turnarounds of just 30 minutes. It was expected to perform 8 to 10 takeoffs and landings every single day. This brutally accelerates wear and tear. To survive this, the 787-3 requires specific engineering changes that most people missed. First, the engines. It used the General Electric NX-1B54. Notice the number 54. This indicates a thrust rating of 53,000 pounds. The standard 787 engines produced 64 to 70,000 pounds. Boeing and General Electric deliberately derated the engines by roughly 16%. Why? Because in a high cycle environment, the enemy is heat. By limiting the max thrust via software, they lowered the turbine entry temperature, TET. This meant the internal turbine blades wouldn't melt or degrade as fast during those 10 daily takeoffs, significantly extending the engine's life between overhauls. Second, the brakes. Traditional hydraulic brakes get incredibly hot during landings and require cooling fans or long wait times before the plane can push back again. The 787 introduced electric brakes. These were a game changer for the 3 variant. They offered better thermal dissipation and allowed the aircraft to land, unload, load, and taxi out again without waiting for the brakes to cool down. It was the perfect machine for the perfect niche, a wide-body shuttle bus optimized for the unique constraints of Japan. So, with the perfect design and 43 orders from ANA and JAL, why did it die? The answer lies in what engineers call the terrible teens. Part 3. The economics of failure. The 787-3 didn't fail because of a design flaw. It failed because of obesity. In the aviation history, the first batch of 787s produced, line numbers 1 through 20, are infamously known as the terrible teens. Due to early struggles with manufacturing carbon fiber on such a massive scale, this aircraft came off the assembly line significantly overweight. Reports indicate these early frames were between 2.3 and 6.8 metric tons heavier than their target weight. For the long-haul 787-8, this weight penalty was a nuance. It meant the airline just had to carry a little less cargo or fly significantly shorter routes. It was manageable. But for the 787-3, this was a death sentence. Remember, the 787-3 used the exact same fuselage structure. It inherited all that excess structural weight. On a 10-hour flight, the fuel efficiency of the 787's engines eventually pays off. But on a 45-minute hop, you are spending the entire flight burning fuel just to lift the heavy composite structure into the air, only to land immediately. The composite advantage completely evaporated. Let's look at the CASM, cost per available seat mile. This is the only number that matters to an airline CEO. When analysts run the numbers of a heavy 787-3 against a mature, cheap-to-buy Airbus A330-300, the 787-3 offered perhaps 8 to 10% better fuel efficiency on short routes. But its ownership, costs, the monthly lease payments, and insurance for a brand new high-tech jet were nearly 30% higher than the older Airbus. For a regional carrier, the small fuel saving could never pay the massive price tag of the plane. Then the timeline collapsed. The entire Dreamliner program was years behind schedule. Japan Airlines, one of the 2 key customers, entered bankruptcy protection in 2010. They needed a reliable airplanes immediately, not experimental prototypes that were overweight and years late. They realized the standard 787-8, while not optimized for their gates, was at least going to be built. They converted their orders to the long-haul version. With the Japanese anchor customers gone, Boeing looked around for other buyers. British Airways for Heathrow, United for US hubs. They all said no. The capital cost was simply too high for a short-range plane. In December 2010, Boeing quietly removed the 787-3 from its price list. The project was dead. But here is the twist. Today, 15 years later, the weight problems are fixed. The 787 is lighter, stronger, and better. So, could the 787-3 actually work now? Part 4. Revival and the what-if scenario. With the 787 program now mature and the weight issues long gone, could Boeing bring this plane back today? Technically, yes. In fact, if they built a 787-3X, today it would be a beast. We now have the technology that was considered science fiction in 2004. Folding wingtips. Instead of chopping the wing and destroying the aerodynamics, a modern 787-3 could simply fold its tips. It would have the full efficient 60-meter span in the air to save fuel, and then fold to 52 meters on the ground to fit into the tight gates at Haneda or Heathrow. It solves every problem the original had. But it will never happen. And the reason isn't technical, it is the rise of the super narrow body. Since 2010, the market has fundamentally shifted. Aircraft like the Airbus A321neo and the Boeing 737 MAX 10 have changed the mass. These are single-aisle planes that can now carry up to 240 passengers. Compare the economics. To fly a wide-body 787-3 on a short route, you are dragging a massive heavy fuselage designed for 2 aisles and cargo containers that you might not even feel. To fly a 737 MAX 10 on the same route, you carry almost 80% of the same passenger load, but with a trip cost that is roughly 40% lower. The efficiency of modern narrow bodies has cannibalized the market for short-range widebodies. Unless an airport is so incredibly slot-constrained that you need to squeeze every single human possible into one departure slot, the widebody just doesn't make financial sense. The niche that the 787-3 tried to fill simply doesn't exist anymore. The Boeing 787-3 remains one of aviation's most fascinating what-ifs. It was a scalpel designed for a very specific surgery, but between the manufacturing delays, the weight penalties, and the shifting market, the patient died before the surgery could even begin. Its legacy, however, lives on. The high-cycle engines and electric brakes developed for this ghost plane are now standard on the 787-10, which ANA and United use today as the spiritual successor to the plane that never was. The 787-3 proved that in aviation you can't just fight gravity, you also have to fight the accounting department. And usually, the accountants win. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive, press the like and subscribe button. Fly safe and see you in the next one. For the last 20 years, the strategy in the Middle East was simple. Copy Emirates. Every airline wanted the biggest planes, the massive hubs, and millions of transit passengers. Just look at Dubai. It is an absolute giant. You see endless rows of the Airbus A380s and terminals packed with people. It is impressive, sure, but let's be honest, it is also chaotic and stressful. Now look at this. This is Muscat. It is calm. It is beautiful. Just a modern Boeing 787 waiting at the gate. While its neighbors are still fighting to be the biggest superconnector, Oman Air has decided to stop the race. They said enough. Instead of copying the giant, they are building the Anti-Emirates. Today we are going to look at why Oman Air is shrinking its fleet and why becoming smaller might be the smartest move in aviation in 2026. But first, hit the like and subscribe button. This simple action is vital for me. Thank you very much. The superconnector trap. To understand Oman Air's new plan, we first need to look at the giants next door. For a long time, the aviation world in the Middle East was defined by Emirates, Qatar Airways and Etihad. Their model is legendary. Build a massive airport in the desert, buy hundreds of wide-body planes and connects the entire world through one single hub. It works perfectly for Dubai and Doha, but for everyone else, it is a dangerous trap. Just look at Etihad Airways in Abu Dhabi. A few years ago, they tried to grow too fast. They wanted to catch up with Emirates at any cost. The result was a disaster. They lost billions of dollars and almost went bankrupt. Oman Air was heading down the exact same path. For years, they tried to be a major transit hub. They wanted to funnel millions of passengers through Muscat, just like their neighbors. But the math didn't work. The airline was losing money consistently. They were burning cash just to keep up with the competition. Finally, the leadership realized a hard truth. The market is full. To survive, Oman Air didn't need to get bigger. They need to stop copying the giants and find their own way. The boutique philosophy. So what is the solution? Oman Air calls it the boutique airline strategy. The goal was simple. Get passengers to fly through Muscat to reach London, Bangkok or Sydney. Oman was just a transfer point. But that era is over. Now the focus has shifted from transit to destination. They want to bring tourists to Oman, not just move them across the map. This means they are no longer chasing numbers. They don't want to carry millions of passengers who are just looking for the cheapest economy ticket. Instead, they are focusing on quality. They want the premium traveler who values comfort over house. Think of it like the hotel industry. Emirates is like a massive 5-star mega resort with 3,000 rooms. It is impressive, but it is crowded and you are just one of thousands of guests. Oman Air wants to be the exclusive boutique hotel with only 50 rooms. It is quiet, personal and curated. They are proving that you don't need to be the biggest to be the best. One world, the secret weapon. So how do you survive as a small airline surrounded by sharks? The answer is simple. You don't fight alone. This is the biggest difference between Oman Air and Emirates. Emirates is famous for doing everything by itself. They don't join alliances. They rely only on their own fleet. But Oman Air knows it cannot win that way. In 2025, they made a game-changing move. They officially joined to the One World Alliance. This is their secret weapon. Suddenly, Oman Air doesn't need to buy hundreds of planes to reach the world. By joining the alliance, they instantly gained access to over 1,000 destinations. They can now sell you a ticket to almost anywhere on the planet, using their partners' networks. For years, Qatar was the fierce rival next door. But now, because they are both in one world, the former enemies are partners. Instead of fighting a price war for every single passenger, they can now cooperate. It is a brilliant strategy. Stop the expensive war and start sharing the profits. Optimization over scale. To make this new strategy work, Oman Air had to make some tough choices about their hardware. First, they decided to kill the Airbus A340 fleet. These planes served them well, but they are older and less efficient. In the new boutique era, every drop of fuel counts. Instead, they are betting everything on the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. This is the perfect tool for their mission. Unlike the massive A380, which needs 500 passengers just to break even, the Dreamliner is smaller and lighter. It allows Oman Air to fly long distances on thin routes. Routes that are profitable but simply does not have enough people to fill a giant double-decker plane. For shorter flights, especially to connect with India and neighboring countries, they rely on the 737 MAX. It is efficient and does the job perfectly. But the biggest change is inside the cabin. You won't find first class on their new planes. Oman Air realized that flying empty first-class suites is a waste of money. Instead, they introduced the Business Studio. This is a super business class. It offers the privacy and luxury of first class, but at a price point that makes sense. It is smart luxury, not wasteful luxury. The airport experience. If you have ever transferred through Dubai, you know the struggle. You land, you wait for a train between terminals, you walk for 20 minutes, and you stand in endless lines. It is loud, crowded and stressful. Honestly, it often feels more like a giant shopping mall than an airport. Muscat offers the complete opposite. It is a definition of stress-free. The new terminal in Muscat is designed for speed and comfort. Everything is under one roof. You can walk from your arrival gate to your departure gate in just a few minutes. There are no trains to catch and no marathon walks to endure. The design reflects the country itself. While Dubai screams busy and expensive, Muscat is calm and welcoming. It uses natural light, quiet spaces and elegant architecture. It turns the worst part of travel, the layover, into a moment of relaxation. For a passenger tired after a long flight, silence is the ultimate luxury. The anti-Dubai destination. An airline is always a mirror of its country. Just as Oman Air is the opposite of the Emirates, the country of Oman is the opposite of Dubai. Dubai is famous of having the tallest skyscrapers, artificial islands, and endless hype. It is impressive, but it often feels man-made. Oman is completely different. It is the anti-Dubai. Here, instead of glass towers, you see jagged mountains. Instead of giant shopping malls, you see ancient forts and traditional markets. It offers an authentic Arabian experience, not a theme park. Oman Air uses this difference to its advantage. They don't just want you to change planes, they want you to step outside. That is why they heavily promote their stopover program. They allow passengers to stay in the country for a few days at no extra flight cost. It is a clever deal. Why spend your layover sleeping in an airport chair when you could be exploring the mountains? So will this bold strategy actually work? It is definitely a risk. In the business world, we are usually taught that growth is good. Shrinking your airline to make more money sounds a bit crazy. However, Oman Air is betting that quality wins over quantity. By flying fewer planes and focusing on higher-paying passengers, they hope to finally become profitable after years of losses. In a world where flying often feels like taking a crowded bus with wings, Oman Air is trying to bring back a sense of exclusivity. They realized they cannot beat Emirates at their own game, so they simply stopped playing it. They do not want to be the biggest airline on the planet. They just want to be the best airline for their niche. Now I want to ask you, what would you choose for your next trip? A quick, quiet transfer in Muscat or the shopping and bright lights of Dubai? Let me know in the comments below. If you learned something new today, hitting the subscribe button is the best way to support me. As a new channel, every subscriber truly counts and motivates me to create better stories. Click here to watch the next video. Thanks for watching and see you next time. In a world where airlines fight for every drop of fuel and retire planes after just 15 years, these giants are dinosaurs. The MD-11 is loud, dirty, and incredibly thirsty for fuel. Passenger airlines gave up on this play way back in the early 2000s. But look at the night sky. It is still swarming with them. Why do the richest logistic companies in the world still cling to technology from the 1980s? The answer lies in the mass. It goes against all common sense, but it makes billions of dollars. But first, hit the like and subscribe button. This simple action is vital for me. Thank you very much. Mathematics. Capital expenditures versus fuel. Wait, doesn't an old plane like this burn money every time it flies? Let's look at the real difference between owning a plane and flying it. If you wanna buy a brand new Boeing 777 freighter today, the official price is around $352 million. In reality, after negotiations, airlines pay about $160 to $170 million. That is still a huge amount of money. Now let's look at the MD-11. FedEx and UPS were smart. They bought these used planes from passenger airlines for peanuts, maybe $10 or $20 million each. Then they spent about $15 million to convert them into cargo planes. The final price for a ready-to-fly MD-11? Only $25 to $35 million. For the price of just one shiny new Boeing 777, you can buy a fleet of 5 or 6 MD-11s. But what about the gas? It is true, the MD-11 is thirsty. It burns about 20 to 25% more fuel than a modern jet. That is roughly 8,000 kilograms of fuel per hour compared to 6,000 kilograms in a 777. However, unless oil prices explode to $150 a barrel, that extra fuel cost simply doesn't matter. Today, with oil sitting comfortably around $60 or $70, the math is even better. The massive amount of money you save on buying the plane easily covers the fuel bill for years. As they say in the airline business, the best plane is the plane with no monthly payments. The lazy plane factor. Utilization. So why doesn't this math work for passenger airlines? Why doesn't KLM fly old cheap planes? It is because the business models are completely different. To pay for itself, a modern jet must be in the sky for 14 to 16 hours every day. When you fly that much, saving fuel is the most important thing in the world. But cargo is a different game. The life of a FedEx MD-11 is actually very lazy. It usually flies a short trip at night to a major hub, like Memphis or Louisville. It sits on the ground all day long while packages are sorted. Finally, it flies back the next night. In total, it might only fly for 3 to 6 hours a day. Here's the logic. You cannot buy a new Boeing 777 for $170 million and let it sit on a concrete for 18 hours a day. That is a huge amount of frozen money, doing absolutely nothing. But for a cheap older plane, that is fine. If the job involves a lot of waiting on the ground, the cheap MD-11 is actually the perfect machine. The golden mean niche. Lowered capacity. You might ask, why not just use a different old plane? Well, the MD-11 survives because it has a unique superpower – its size. It fits into a perfect niche that no other older plane can fill. Let's look at the alternatives. First, you have the Boeing 767-300 freighter. It is a great plane, but it can only carry about 53 to 58 tons. For long flights between continents, that is often just too small. On the other side, you have the legendary Boeing 747-400, the jumbo jet. It is a monster that can lift 113 to 120 tons. But here's the problem. Flying a 4-engine giant that is only half full is incredibly expensive. It is overkill. This is where the MD-11 hits the absolute sweet spot. It carries roughly 85 to 92 tons. It holds significantly more cargo than the smaller 767, but it is much cheaper to operate than the massive 747. For specific high-volume routes, like Anchorage to Tokyo or Cologne to Louisville, the MD-11 is not too big and not too small. It is just right. Engineering hell and hole number 2. But it is not all good news. The accountants love this plane. The mechanics absolutely hate it. The biggest headache is the number 2 engine, the one stuck right in the tail. Unlike the engines under the wings, you cannot just walk up to this one. It sits extremely high off the ground. Mechanics need special high-lift platforms just to reach it. Changing an engine on the wing is a standard job, but changing the tail engine is a logistical nightmare. It takes much longer and requires way more effort. And the worst part – spare parts. Remember, McDonnell Douglas disappeared in 1997. No one is manufacturing new parts for this plane anymore. So how do FedEx and UPS keep them flying? They have to cannibalize other planes. They buy old retired MD-11s just to strip them for parts, like vultures. It is the only way to keep the fleet alive. Pilot killer or diva? If the mechanics hate the MD-11, the pilots, well, they respect it, but they also fear it. Some call it the diva, others have darker nicknames. The reason is simple. This plane does not forgive mistakes. Statistically, the MD-11 has a higher accident rate during landing than almost any other modern wide-body jet. You might remember the tragic crashes of FedEx Flight 80 in Narita or Lufthansa Flight A340 in Riyadh. Both happened right at the moment of landing. Why is it so difficult to land? It comes down to physics. To save fuel and reduce drag, engineers made the horizontal stabilizer, the tail of the plane, smaller than usual. While this made the plane efficient, it also made it less stable. To keep this heavy beast in the air with such a small tail, you have to fly fast. The landing speed, or VREF, is incredibly high, often around 150 to 160 knots, almost 300 km per hour. This is 20 to 30 km per hour faster than similar planes. Everything happens much quicker for the pilots. To help with stability, there is a computer system called LSAS. It is supposed to assign the pilots, but sometimes it behaves unpredictably, fighting against their inputs. The biggest danger is the bounce. If a pilot hits the runway a little too hard, the plane can bounce back into the air. If they try to push the nose down too quickly to fix it, the plane can enter a violent cycle called porpoising. In the worst cases, the nose gear collapses and the plane flips over on its back. It is a powerful machine, but it demands absolute perfection every time it touches the ground. The end of an era. However, nothing lasts forever. The end is finally coming. FedEx has officially announced the beginning of the end. By the year of 2028, they plan to retire their fleet. They are replacing these old warriors with the smaller Boeing 767 for shorter routes and the massive Boeing 777 for the long hauls. But here is the surprise. They are not killing the MD-11 because of fuel prices. The real killer is maintenance costs. As these planes get older, the engines break down more often. When a plane is stuck in a hangar for repairs, it loses money. Eventually, the cost of fixing it becomes higher than the money you save by owning it. Now I want to ask you, do you miss the era of tri-jets, or do you prefer the efficiency of modern twin jets? Write your thoughts below. If you learned something new today, hitting the subscribe button is the best way to support me. As a new channel, every subscriber truly counts and motivates me to create better stories. Click here to watch the next video. Thanks for watching and see you next time! Look at this. It is elegant, isn't it? A true giant of the skies. This is the Airbus A340. Now look at this. It's being torn apart, scrapped, crushed into metal cubes. Here is the mystery. The A340 is technically one of the safest planes ever built. In over 30 years of flying, not a single passenger has ever died in an accident on this aircraft. Zero. Usually, airlines keep safe planes forever, but with the A340, they did the opposite. They retired them faster than any other modern jet. Why? The answer isn't about bad engines or poor design. It is much sadder than that. The A340 was an engineering masterpiece. It was the perfect plane for an era that ended the exact moment it started flying. Before we dive into this story of bad luck and big ambitions, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps me a lot. Now let's find out where it all went wrong. Born in the age of fear. To understand the tragedy of this plane, we have to look at its wings. Why does it have 4 engines? Today, almost every long-distance plane has only 2. 4 engines mean more fuel, more maintenance, and much more money. It seems like a waste. But in the 1980s, where the A340 was designed, this wasn't a mistake. It was a necessity. Back then, aviation has controlled by something called the 60-minute rule. The rule was simple. If a plane has only two engines, it was not allowed to fly more than 60 minutes away from the nearest airport. Regulators were terrified. They thought that if one engine failed over the ocean, the second one might fail too, leaving the plane to glide into the water. This was a huge problem for airlines. You cannot fly straight across the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean if you have to stay close to land. So Airbus made a strategic bet. They designed the A340 with 4 engines. This allowed the plane to fly anywhere, crossing any ocean without restrictions. Airbus didn't just sell the technology, they sold the feeling of safety. Their marketing slogan was legendary: 4 engines, 4 long hours. They were basically telling the world, 2 engines are for short trips. Real, safe, intercontinental travels needs 4. Airbus bet billions of dollars on one specific idea, that the world would always be afraid of flying over the ocean on 2 engines. It was a smart bet in 1980s, but the world was about to change. Betrayal of the rules, ETOPS and the curse of timing. Just as the first A340s were being delivered to customers, the rules of the game changed completely. A new acronym appeared in the aviation world. Officially, it stands for Extended Range Twin Engine Operational Performance Standards. But pilots had a funnier name for it: engines turn or passengers swim. Jokes aside, ETOPS meant that engine technology had become incredibly reliable. Regulators looked at the data and realized that modern engines almost never failed. So they increased the limit. First 220 minutes, then 280 minutes away from an airport. Suddenly, the oceans were open for twin-engine planes. This was a nightmare for Airbus. Their main advantage, having 4 engines for safety, was no longer unique. And then the true villain of this story arrived: the Boeing 777. The 777 was a monster. It could carry the same number of passengers as the A340. It could fly the same long distances. But it did all of this with only 2 engines. For airline accountants, a plane with 2 engines is much cheaper than a plane with 4. You buy 2 fewer engines, you repair 2 fewer engines. The maintenance cost dropped by nearly 30%. Almost overnight, the A340 became obsolete. It was like buying the best DVD player in the world on the exact day Netflix was invented. Flying hair dryer. If you talk to pilots or aviation fans, they often laugh when you mention the A340, specifically the 300 version. They have a special nickname for its engines, the hair dryers. Why? Because Airbus made a strange decision choice. To save fuel, they didn't put massive powerful engines on the plane. Instead, they used 4 small CFM56 engines. These are excellent engines for a small plane, like the Boeing 737, but on a huge, heavy A340 filled with hundreds of passengers and fuel for 12-hour flight, they looked tiny. The result is that the A340 climbs incredibly slowly. When you watch a video of this plane taking off, it feels like it will never leave the ground. It seems to use every single meter of the runway. This slow climb created one of the most famous jokes in aviation history. The A340 doesn't actually fly by aerodynamics. It is so slow that the Earth's curves are way beneath it. In reality, the plane was doing exactly it was designed to do. It was optimized for efficiency, not power. But the reputation stuck. To the world, it looked like a weak giant struggling to get into the sky. a stab in the back from his own brother. But the A340 didn't just lose to Boeing. The most painful blow came from inside of its own family. You see, when Airbus designed the A340, they also designed a twin brother, the Airbus A330. These two planes are almost identical. They share the same fuselage, the same wings, and the same cockpit. If you sit inside as a passenger, you cannot tell the difference. The only real difference is under the wings. Originally, this made perfect sense. The A330 was designed for medium distances, and the A340 was the long-range expert. They were supposed to work together as a team, but then technology improved. The A330 got better engines and could carry more fuel. Slowly, it started flying farther and farther. Soon, the short-range brother could fly across the Atlantic just as easily as the four-engine giant. Airlines asked a simple question: why should we buy the expensive A340 if the cheaper A330 can do the same job? It became a classic case of corporate cannibalism. The A330 became a global bestseller, while the A340 gathered dust. Airbus had accidentally built the weapon that killed their own flagship. Attempt at revenge. A340-600. Airbus didn't give up without a fight. They decided that if they couldn't beat Boeing on efficiency, they would beat them on size. They made it longer. And then they made it even longer. The result was the A340-600. At the time, it was the longest passenger plane in the world. It was so long and thin that people gave it a nickname, the Flying Pencil. It was a beast of a machine, designed to carry almost 400 passengers. And because the plane was so long, engineers had to be creative to save space. This led to one of the coolest features in modern aviation. On some A340-600s, you won't find the toilets in the main cabin. Instead, you see a staircase leading down into the darkness. If you walk down the stairs, you find a block of toilets located in the cargo hold, underneath the passengers. It looks futuristic, almost like a private jet or a nightclub. Passengers love it. But cool toilets couldn't save the plane. Just as the Flying Pencil entered the market, Boeing released their ultimate weapon, the 777-300ER. It was almost the same size as the A340-600. It had the same range. But once again, it had only two massive engines. The Boeing 777-300ER burned 20% less fuel. For airlines, the choice was obvious. The A340-600 was a beautiful engineering achievement, but economically, it was dead on arrival. Absurd accidents. Lucky in misfortune. I said in the start that the A340 was incredibly safe, but that doesn't mean it hasn't crashed. In fact, the A340 has a strange record. Usually, when a big jet is destroyed, it is a tragedy with many victims. But with the A340, it is a miracle. In 2005, Air France Flight 358 landed in Toronto during a terrible storm. The runway was wet and slippery. The plane didn't stop. It shut off the end of the runway and burst into flames. The aircraft was completely destroyed by the fire. And yet, all 309 people on board survived. They evacuated in less than 90 seconds. It proved that the A340 was built like a tank. It protected its passengers until the very end. But the most famous accident didn't happen in the sky. It happened on the ground. And it is the perfect example of this plane's bad luck. In 2007, at the Airbus factory in Toulouse, engineers were testing a brand new A340-600. It was painted in the beautiful colors of Etihad Airways, ready to be delivered. The crew needed to test the engines, but they made a foolish mistake. They didn't put hooks, safety blocks behind the wheels. Then they turned all 4 engines to maximum power.
$200 million straight into the wall. I don't know how we're going to explain this one.
The brakes screamed. The plane overpowered them. It lurched forward and smashed straight into a concrete wall. The front of the plane was crashed. The cockpit broke off. A brand new $200 million jet was written off as scrap metal before it had carried a single paying passenger. That is the story of the A340. Tough enough to save everyone in a disaster, but unlucky enough to crash into a wall before leaving the factory. So where are these giants today? If you go to a major airport, you probably won't see one. Most A340s have been sent to the desert to be scrapped. Their metal is recycled into soda cans and window frames. But there are a few survivors. The biggest fan of the A340 is surprisingly Lufthansa. While other airlines rushed to sell them, the German kept flying them. Why? Because Lufthansa owns these planes completely. They don't have to pay expensive monthly rents to banks. For them, the A340-600 is still a useful workhorse, carrying hundreds of passengers out of Munich and Frankfurt every day. There is also a strange sanctuary for these planes in the Middle East – Iran. Because of international sanctions, Iranian airlines cannot buy new jets from Boeing or Airbus. They are desperate for parts and planes. So they secretly buy old A340s from all over the world. If you go to Tehran today, it is like a time capsule, full of these 4-engine legions flying for Oman Air. But perhaps the most famous A340s were once used by the German government. For years, the German chancellor flew on the VIP version of the A340 named Konrad Adenauer. But remember, this is the unlucky plane. The government jet became a national joke. It broke down constantly. It had electrical failures, tire problems. Once Chancellor Angela Merkel was on her way to the G20 summit in Argentina, and the plane's communication system failed completely. She had to land and take a commercial flight like a normal passenger. Eventually, Germany got tired of the embarrassment and retired the planes early. Today, the market value of an A340 is shockingly low. You can buy a functioning A340 for $12 million. That is the price of a small, second-hand business jet. You could technically buy one yourself. But be warned, the plane is cheap. But filling the gas tank just once might cost you more than the plane itself. Conclusion. The story of the Airbus A340 is not a story of failure, it is a story of bad timing. This wasn't a bad plane. In fact, it was a magnificent machine. It was comfortable, quiet, and incredibly safe. It did everything the engineers asked it to do. But it was defeated by something it couldn't fight: the price of oil and the relentless march of technology. It was a victim of progress. As we watch the last A340s disappear from our airports, we are losing something special. We are losing the era of elegance. There is something powerful about seeing a plane with 4 engines. It looks strong. It looks like it's over the sky. But the aviation world doesn't care about beauty. It cares about efficiency. Today the skies are filled with twin-engine jets that all look exactly the same. They are cheaper, they are cleaner, and they are sensible. But they are also a little bit boring. The A340 was the last of its kind. It was the unluckiest plane in the world. But for those of us who love aviation, it will always be one of the most beautiful. Now I want to ask you, Do you miss the era of four-engine giants? Or do you prefer the efficiency of modern twin jets? Write your thoughts in the comments. If you learned something new today, hitting that subscribe button is the best way to support me. As a new channel, every subscriber truly counts and motivates me to create better stories. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Look at these two planes. On one side, you have the Boeing Dreamliner. It's huge, it's famous, it's a symbol of power. On the other side, you have the Airbus A321 XLR. It looks small, like a regular bus with wings. Now, imagine you are an airline CEO. You need to fly from London to New York. Which plane makes you rich? Your intuition says, the big one. More seats means more tickets, right? Well, your intuition is wrong. In modern aviation, the big plane is actually a trap. If you don't fill every single seat, that massive Boeing burns your money fast. But the little Airbus, it's a cash machine. It does the same job, flies the same distance, but costs half of the price to operate. This is the story of how Airbus didn't build a new spaceship. Instead, they took a simple, boring plane and gave it a superpower. With one engineering trick and a calculator, they destroyed Boeing's strategy for the next 10 years. Here's how Airbus outmastered everyone with just one jet. Fasten your seatbelt, check your like and subscription. Let's take off and find out. Strategic trap. What is the middle of the market? To understand why Airbus won, you first need to understand the battlefield. For decades, aviation had two separate worlds. On one side, you had the small single-aisle planes like the Boeing 737 or the standard Airbus A320 that carry about 180 people and are great for short trips like London to Berlin. On the other side, you had the massive wide-body jets like the Boeing 787 or Airbus A350. They carry 300 people and can fly halfway around the world. But between these two, there was a huge gap, a no man's land. This is what we call the middle of the market. Here is the ironic part. Boeing actually owned this market. They had a legendary plane called the Boeing 757. It was powerful and perfect for this middle zone. But in 2004, Boeing made a fatal mistake. They killed the 757. Why? Because Boeing bet everything on the hub-and-spoke model. They believed that passengers would always fly to big central airports, like Dubai or Frankfurt, and then switch to a smaller plane. They thought you didn't mind changing planes. But they were wrong. Passengers hate connecting flights. We hate running through terminals. We hate losing our luggage. We want to fly point to point, directly from our home city to our destination. Airbus saw this shift before anyone else, but instead of spending another $15 billion to design a brand new plane to fill this gap, they did something much smarter. They looked at their existing A321, their standard, boring workhorse, and decided to simply modify it. Engineering. How to fit an ocean liner into a minibus. So, what was the secret ingredient? How do you make a short-range plane fly across the ocean? The answer is fuel, but the problem is where to put it. Normally, if you want extra range, you install big removable fuel tanks inside the cargo hold. It works, but it is a bad trade-off. You get more fuel, but you lose space for cargo. You can fly far, but you can't bring a lot of goods. Airbus engineers did something radical. They didn't just put a tank in the plane. They built the tank into the structure of the plane. It is called the Rear Center Tank, or RCT. It's not just a container. It's fully integrated into the fuselage. This masterpiece of packaging holds an extra 12,900 liters of fuel without stealing space from your cargo. This change is massive. It pushed the plane's maximum takeoff weight to 101 tons. For comparison, the original A320 weighed about 70 tons. But this innovation came with a huge risk. Usually fuel tanks are in the wings, far away from passengers. But this new tank, it sits directly underneath the cabin floor, right under your feet. Regulators were worried. What happens if the plane crashes on its belly? Will the tank explode? It was a certification nightmare. There were delays and arguments about fire safety. But in the end, Airbus reinforced the structure and proved it was safe. They took a massive engineering gamble and it paid off. Now let's open the calculator, because this is where the A321 XLR stops being just a plane and starts being a money printer. Let's look at the trip cost, the total price to fly the plane from point A to point B. Imagine a standard 7-hour flight London to New York. If you fly a big wide-body jet, like an Airbus A340 or a Boeing 787, you have a problem. That plane weighs over 120 tons when empty. It burns about 5 to 6 tons of fuel every hour. When you add up fuel, crew and airport fees, that single flight costs the airline between $45,000 to $50,000. Now look at the A321 XLR. It weighs a half as much, about 60 tons. It sips fuel, only about 2.5 tons per hour. The total cost of the same flight, about $25,000. It is literally half the price to operate. But here is the most important number, the break-even point. This is the number of tickets you must sell just to cover your costs. On the big wide-body jet, you need to find about 170 to 200 passengers just to break even. If you sell fewer tickets, you lose money. On the XLR, you only need about 100 passengers to cover the costs. Everything after that is pure profit. Now let's get specific about the fuel comparison with the old Boeing 757. A Boeing 757 is a classical muscle car. It's powerful, but it is thirsty. It burns about 3,600 kilograms of fuel per hour. The A321 XLR is a modern hybrid. It burns roughly 2,400 kilograms per hour. That is a saving of 1,200 kilograms every single hour. If an airline flies this plane for 4,000 hours a year, they've saved nearly 5,000 tons of fuel per plane. At current prices, that is a saving of $3 to $4 million per plane every single year. If you have a fleet of 50 aircraft, that is $150 million of pure profit just from fuel savings. This is why airlines are rushing to buy it. Changing the map. Are wide-body jets dead? So does this mean the big wide-body jets are dead? Not exactly. On massive trunk routes, like London to Dubai, you still need big planes to carry 400 people at once. But the A321 XLR changes the map for everything else. It allows airlines to play a new game called fragmentation. Instead of flying one big Boeing 777 from London to New York at 1 p.m., an airline can now fly 3 A321 XLRs at 9 a.m., 1 p.m. and 6 p.m. The cost is roughly the same, but the passengers are happier because they have more choices. And what about new routes? Consider a route like Dublin to Cleveland. In the past, putting a wide-body jet on this route was financial suicide. You would lose $20,000 per flight, because there simply aren't enough passengers. But with the XLR, this route became profitable. Airlines can now connect second-tier cities directly. We will see flights like Hamburg to Boston, Edinburgh to Atlanta, or Sapporo to Seattle. You might ask, is it smart to use a small plane at big hubs like Heathrow, where landing slots cost millions? Usually, the answer is no. You want the biggest plane possible to maximize the value of the slot. But the XLR solves a different problem. It allows big airlines to keep their slots active during winter or off-peak times, without burning cash on empty big jets. It gives them flexibility they never had before. The success of this plane is humiliating for Boeing, but it is also a lesson for Airbus itself. 15 years ago, Airbus bet everything on the A380 Super Jumbo. It was a double-decker engineering marvel, but financially, it was a disaster. Airbus spent over $25 billion to develop it. They only sold about 250 units in total. They never made their money back. Now look at the A321 XLR. Because it is a modification of an existing plane, the development cost is tiny compared to the A380. And the sales? Before the first passenger even stepped on a board, airlines had already ordered over 550 units. Indigo, American Airlines, United Airlines, Qantas, Wizz Air, they all want them. With the A380, Airbus built a palace that no one could afford. With the XLR, they built a highly efficient bus that everyone needs. And Boeing, they have no answer. Their competitor, the 737 MAX 10, simply cannot compete. The Airbus can fly 4,700 nautical miles. The Boeing tops out at 3,300. The difference is the difference between arriving safely in Rome or splashing down in the Atlantic Ocean. Why can't Boeing just fix it? They can't. The 737 sits too low to the ground. Its landing gear is too short to fit the bigger engines or wings needed to fly farther. They hit an engineering dead end. To catch up, Boeing needs to design a completely new plane from scratch. That will take 10 years and $15 billion. Airbus didn't just build a plane. They looked at the mass, found a gap in the market, and filled it before the rival even woke up. And that is how Airbus outmastered everyone with just one jet. The passenger experience. But wait, all this talk about fuel and profit is great for the airline. But what about you, the passenger? You might be thinking, 10 hours in a narrow tube? That sounds like a nightmare. Usually, long flights mean big planes with 2 aisles and a lot of space to walk around. The A321 XLR has only 1 aisle. So is it going to be a claustrophobic? First, let's talk about the price. Will your ticket be cheaper? It depends on where you fly. Scenario A. On popular routes like London to New York, the answer is yes. Because the XLR is cheap to operate, low-cost airlines like JetBlue or Wizz Air can now fly across the ocean. They will force the big legacy airlines to lower their prices. Competition is good for your wallet. Scenario B. On exotic direct routes like Dublin to Cleveland, the answer is no. You won't get a discount. Instead, you are paying for convenience. You pay to avoid a layover. You are buying time, not a cheap seat. But ask yourself, would you tolerate a thinner cabin if it saves you $200 or gets you home 3 hours faster? Most people would say yes, and Airbus knows it. And that is exactly the question I would like to ask you to share in the comments. I would be very interested to hear your opinion. And if you liked this video, consider subscribing. I'm just starting this channel, but I put a lot of effort into every video to make it clear, accurate and worth your time. And now check out one of these videos. I think you will like them. See you there! It is difficult to see how the legend, the Queen of the Skies, makes her last flight. But Lufthansa, against all logic, keeps running 747s for decades to come. Frankly speaking, today there are fewer than 39 active passenger 747s, and 27 of them are operated by Lufthansa. That's about 70%. I've prepared some facts for you. Japan Airlines, JAL, formerly the largest operator of 747s, retired them before 2011, shifting long-haul work to the twin-engine 777. Singapore Airlines, the first operator of the 747-400 in 1989, made the Megatop's final flight in 2012. Air France held a farewell ceremony for the Jumbo in January 2016, ending almost 45 years of using the Jumbo jet. They received their first 747 in 1970. United Airlines and Delta Airlines, the last two US operators, simultaneously completed their final commercial flights with the 747 in the fourth quarter of 2017. Qantas Australia retired its Jumbos in July 2020, conducting a symbolic farewell flight with a kangaroo figure in the sky. British Airways, Europe's largest operator of 747s, announced in July 2020 that it had made the heartbreaking decision to retire its entire fleet of 31 Boeing 747-400s ahead of schedule due to the pandemic. The airline had been using the 747 for almost 50 years, since the day of Boeing, and had planned to keep them until 2024, but the crisis forced it to say goodbye earlier. So the era of Jumbo is fading away. But why were ultra-high capacity aircraft created? Also, don't forget to like and subscribe, it is vital for me. To understand why Lufthansa keeps the 747 while others retire it, we first need to see why gigantic jets were built at all. First of all, it's the idea of large hubs. In other words, a person flies from their local city, for example to London. Then they fly to New York, and from there take a local flight, for example to Allentown. It means that the country has several large international entry points and a bunch of smaller airports that serve domestic logistics or at best receive flights from neighboring countries. First commercial jetliners like the 707 and DC-8 made long trips faster and cheaper. Passenger numbers grew every year, often by double digits. Older planes simply could not carry enough people on the busiest routes. This is where the 747 idea came from. Airports like Heathrow, JFK, John F. Kennedy International Airport, Narita and Frankfurt were already jam-packed. If you cannot add more takeoffs and landings, you make each flight bigger. One large flight can move a peak-hour crowd better than two small ones. Rules and technology also pushed manufacturers toward big four-engine jets. In that era, two-engine aircraft hadn't yet proven their reliability for many long over-water routes. Regulators often required 3 or 4 engines to be present. Engines themselves were weaker than today's General Electric GE90 or Rolls-Royce Stantec WB. So to lift 350–500 people far and safely, 4 engines were the practical choice. There was another profitable stream – cargo transport. The 747's wide body has big lower holds, so one flight could earn from passengers and freight, very useful across the Atlantic and to Asia. Boeing even planned for a cargo future from day one. They put the cockpit on the upper deck, so the nose could open as a big cargo door. The famous hump was a practical cargo idea first. The upper deck seating area came later. Incidentally, we are currently observing that this calculation has proven successful. Although supersonic passenger aircraft have failed, the market has still shifted towards smaller aircraft. However, the big number of cargo transportation relies on the Boeing 747F. Currently, there are about 350-400 active cargo aircraft of this series. And let me remind you that there are fewer than 39 passenger versions of this aircraft left. And of course, prestige matters. Flag carriers like Pan Am wanted a national flagship. Flying the biggest airliners signaled the status and technical strength of the USA. Put together: big hubs, full airports, older engines, rules, and extra cargo revenue. Very large jets made sense for that time. But why such a wonderful aircraft lost its meaning now? I hope you understand that the reason is not regulators, pollution or noise. If 4-engine double-deck planes still made sense, we would build a new one. We would use General Electric GE9X or Rolls-Royce 10XWB engines, the ones on the 777X and A350. It could have from 600 to 800 seats, maybe close to 1000 in a tight layout. I'll say even more. Per seat, it could be quieter and burn less fuel. Regulators would be happier, airlines would save money. Even within the 747 family progress was made. The 747-8 burns about 50% less fuel than the 747-400, around 3.5 liters per 100 passenger kilometers versus 4.27. However, this still means roughly 30–35% more fuel burn per seat than the Airbus 350-900, around 2.4 liters per 100 passenger kilometer. Lufthansa is well aware of this gap. The oncoming Boeing 777X is expected to offer 25–30 better fuel efficiency per seat than the 747-8, while keeping roughly the same capacity, 400 seats. But that's not the point. The problem isn't tech. The problem is the market. We don't live in a pure hub-and-spoke world anymore. Today, many roads work point-to-point. You don't have to pass through a mega hub every time. You can board in a regional city and fly directly to another city. Not Milan, Frankfurt, Tokyo. Think Bologna, Fukuoka. On a smaller, efficient twin. What made this possible? Simply because after the arrival of Airbus A300, ETOPS rules changed significantly. Previously, twin-engine aircraft were allowed to be at most 1 hour of flight from a reserve airport. But now this number has grown to more than 6 hours. This means that most routes can now be flown directly. With more direct flights available, passengers value frequency and no connections more than one giant trip through a hub. 2 or 3 mid-size flights a day are better than one huge departure, for both passengers and airlines. Passengers can choose their flight time, and airlines take on less risk. But why don't very large jets work in point-to-point? Demand is spread out. You don't have 800 or 1000 people ready at one time. You have 300, 400 hours a day in different time slots. If you wait to fill one mega flight, you lose frequency, and you lose passengers. Frequency beats size. 2 or 3 medium-sized flights a day fill the peaks and the valleys. Sales are smoother, the risk of empty seats is lower, ground time is longer for a giant. Boarding 600 plus people takes longer, bags takes longer, cleaning and catering takes longer. One delay blocks hundreds of passengers at once. Infrastructure is a limit. Not every airport has gates and stands for this size. Some runways and taxiways aren't related for it. Even if you can land, turnarounds are slow and expensive. If you look closely, there are only a few roads in the world that truly need a Boeing 747 or an Airbus A380. Emirates currently has 63% of all A380s. And not least, they keep them for PR purposes. Lufthansa operates 70% of all passenger Boeing 747s. The real need of ultra-high-capacity aircraft is somewhere around 100 planes. That isn't enough to keep building new aircraft of this size profitably. Now, let's return to the existing fleet of Boeing 747s. A 747-8 burns more fuel per seat than a modern twin. Think roughly 3.5 liter per 100 passenger kilometer for a 747-8 versus 2.4 for an A350-900 or 2.5 for a 787-9. Same range, similar seats, but the twin is cheaper to fly. 4 engines mean more maintenance, more shop visits, more parts, more inspections. Even if each engine is smaller, 4 are still costlier than 2 per flight hour. Per seat, new twins are quieter and cleaner. Many airports provide lower fees for lower noise and emissions. Night restrictions also hurt older jets more. Twins are more flexible in the network. They turn faster on the ground. Airlines can swap them between routes easily. They also fit more airports. A350 or 787 are code E almost everywhere, while a 747-8 code F needs specific gates and stands. Even more, most passenger 747-400s are 20-30 years old. Heavy D checks are expensive and take the jet out of service for weeks. Cabins also need full refits to match today's standards. But resale values are low. Big money in an old airframe rarely pays back. Lufthansa remains one of the few carriers that continues to actively operate the legendary 4-engine Boeing 747 on passenger flights. As for 2025, Lufthansa's fleet includes 19 Boeing 747-8 intercontinental airliners, making the company the largest operator of the Queen of the Skies in the world. In addition, Lufthansa still uses a limited number of older Boeing 747-400s, 8 active aircraft with an average age of about 25 years. Lufthansa was the launch customer for the passenger version of the 747-8 and has a long history of operating various modifications of the 747 since 1970. They received the first production Boeing 747-8 Intercontinental in May 2012. And also, in June 2014, Boeing delivered the 1500 747, also a 747-8i for Lufthansa. Despite the high operating cost of four-engine aircraft, Lufthansa has concrete reasons for delaying the retirement of the Boeing 747-8 and even 747-400. Delivery delays of replacement aircraft. The airline planned to phase out older types, for example 747-400 or A340, sooner, but faced a problem. Boeing delayed deliveries of its new long-haul 787 Dreamliner and 777X. As a result, Lufthansa had to keep flying existing 747-400s and A340s longer to cover long-haul network needs. According to Lufthansa, by 2024, its fleet was supposed to include 41 new Boeing 787-9 and 777X aircraft, but those deliveries slipped. So on many routes, the 747-400 and A340 remained in service in place of the new jets. In short, manufacturer delays effectively extended the jumbo's life at Lufthansa. High seat count and capacity demand. The Boeing 747 remains hard to replace on routes with very high passenger demand. Lufthansa uses the 747-8 just on these routes. In slot-contained hubs, for example Frankfurt, New York JFK, a large aircraft lets the airline carry more people per movement, using limited slots more efficiently. In some countries and cities there are regulatory or infrastructure limits on flights frequency, so one heavy 747 can be optimal instead of two smaller jets. This strategy makes sense on key trunk routes in Lufthansa's global network. For example, from Frankfurt to New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, Washington, Singapore, Seoul, Johannesburg and others, where demand is consistently strong. First-class product and brand differentiation. Lufthansa positions itself as a premium carrier, and on certain long-haul routes, the percentage of first-class and a large business-class cabin is critical. The 747-8 is deliberately configured with fewer total seats than the 747-400, 364 versus 371, to allow a much larger premium cabin, 8 first-class and 80 business-class seats, the highest premium count of any Lufthansa's aircraft, even more than the A380's 78 business seats. This matters for retaining high-yield corporate clients who expect a top-tier product. Lufthansa's leadership notes that both passengers and crews love the 747 for its comfort and special atmosphere. The upper deck hump with its cozy cabin is a unique advantage that twin-engine types can't replicate. As I already said, Lufthansa's Boeing 747-8 has 88 premium seats. That's 8 in first class and 80 in business class. The regular A350-900 without the new allergic cabin has only 48 seats in business class. The allergic A350 has even fewer, 4 in first class and 38 in business class. This means the 747-8 carries between 83 and 110% more premium seats. According to IATA, premium tickets cost about 5 times more than economy on average. So those extra 40 to 46 premium seats can make a big difference to revenue, especially on routes where flight numbers are limited, like Frankfurt to New York. Belly cargo capability and revenue. Another argument for the 747 is its exceptional cargo capacity. The 747's fuselage let 2 standard LD containers sit side by side in the lower holds, so it can carry significantly more freight in the belly than smaller twin-engine jets. On many long-haul routes, especially to Asia, North America and Africa, cargo contributes a meaningful share of revenue. Using the Boeing 747 gives Lufthansa extra profit from freight without mounting a separate freighter flight. A fully loaded passenger 747-8 can carry up to around 20-25 tons of cargo, in addition to passengers. Something smaller twins like the A350-900 or 787-9 simply can't match in volume. Boeing's oncoming 777-9 is expected to preserve similar belly cargo space while burning roughly 30% less fuel, making it the logical successor of this role. For example, flights to industrial centers, China, India, or major US hubs are consistently full with both people and freight, goods, mail and else. The 747-8's long range, around 14,000 kilometers, allows the airline to operate the longest sectors at full load, without sacrificing cargo. For Lufthansa, this is the key profitability level. When fully loaded with passengers and cargo, the jumbos can be very profitable, despite higher fuel burn, because it carries more paying tonnage per departure. Maximizing ROI on already owned assets. The Boeing 747-8s are relatively young, delivered from 2012 to 2015, and Lufthansa bought them on attractive terms. As launch customer, Lufthansa ordered 747-8i in 2006 with list price of $5.5 billion. But after large discounts, the effective price was about 3.2, approximately 160 million per aircraft. The airline aims to work off that investment over the aircraft's full useful life. Most Lufthansa 747-8s have not yet reached even half of their design life, so it is economically sensible to keep operating them, especially with lease or depreciation already partly paid down. Even if new types promise lower operating costs, a properly deployed 747-8 can still deliver solid returns. From a capital cost perspective, each 747-8 seat costs Lufthansa around $449,000, around 5% less than the equivalent figure on the Airbus A380. On dense roads with high load factors, this makes the jumbo competitive, despite higher fuel burn. As Lufthansa notes, while newer jets have lower maintenance and fuel costs, on dense roads with strong demand, the 747-8 provides excellent ROI, return on investment. In other words, when the jumbo flies full, its seat cost can be fully competitive. Prestige and the emotional factor. While not purely economic, Lufthansa has repeatedly emphasized its special attachment to the Boeing 747 as part of the brand's story. Having the 747 in the fleet sets the airline apart and supports its image. Many customers actively choose 747 flights for the unique Queen of the Skies experience. CEO put it plainly: "Our crews love the 747, our passengers love it. At Lufthansa, we are now looking at another modernization of our 747-8s across all classes, so this aircraft can fly well into the next decade. In that sense, keeping the 747 is also about the soul of the Lufthansa brand, which has long been associated with jumbo jets. Routes for Boeing 747. All Lufthansa passenger 747s are based in Frankfurt, FRA. From there, the jumbos run long-haul flights on several continents. In the 2024 schedule, the 747-400 and 747-8 together cover about 20 destinations worldwide. Most flights go to North America and Asia, with a few South America and Africa. Map 1. 747-400. On screen you can see the regular 747-400 routes from Frankfurt in 2024. These show up in a steady pattern, often once per day. In North America, the 747-400 flies to New York, JFK, Washington Dulles, Toronto, Vancouver and Houston. In Asia, it serves Bengaluru, Seoul, Delhi and Mumbai. Demand on these routes is strong enough to fill a large aircraft throughout the year. For example, flights to New York, JFK, are operated twice a day, and one of these flights, LH400-401, is scheduled especially for the 747-400. In Canada, Toronto and Vancouver are typically seasonal peaks when summer traffic is high. Map 2. 747-8. Now you are seeing the 747-8 network for 2024. The newer 8 version covers a wider set of long-haul routes. In North America, it flies daily to Los Angeles, San Francisco, Miami, Mexico City, Chicago, Newark, and it also covers one of the 2 daily Washington IAD flights. In Asia, it serves Tokyo, Haneda, Singapore, Shanghai, seasonally alternating with the A340-600, and shared with the 400 versions Seoul and Barnaul. In Africa, the 747-8 operates Frankfurt-Johannesburg. In South America, Lufthansa uses the 747-8 to São Paulo and Buenos Aires. These are long 11–13-hour sectors that need both range and a lot of seats. The choice of these 747 routes comes from a mix of factors: very high passenger demand, often with a large premium share, strong cargo volumes, and the right infrastructure at the destination airports. Almost all of these cities are major international hubs or megacities, where Lufthansa can fill a 364-seat 747-8 without trouble. For example, flights to New York, Los Angeles and Singapore draw many business travelers and tourists, and the 747's belly holds are often packed with cargo, which makes the flight even more profitable. In Mexico City, MEX, and Johannesburg, GNB, elevation also matters. These airports sit high above sea level, the air is thinner, and full-weight takeoff is harder. In such conditions, the 4-engine 747 provides stronger thrust and performance compared to twin-engine types, which adds confidence in safety and schedule reliability. Finally, there is a historical element. Lufthansa has flown the jumbo to places like Tokyo and Johannesburg for many years, and these services are part of the airline's identity, which also supports demand. Many aviation geeks and loyal customers choose the 747 on purpose. Why Boeing 747 and not Airbus A380? But you may ask me, why Boeing 747, not Airbus A380? It seems more suitable for super heavy routes. Lufthansa's Airbus A380 has 509 seats. At first, 78 business, 52 premium economy and 371 economy. To keep even an 85% load factor, the airline must sell about 433 seats on every flight. Outside peak season, that's hard to do. The Boeing 747-8 in Lufthansa's layout has 364 seats, so it is much easier to fill year-round. This reduces the risk of flying with hundreds of empty seats and allows the airline to run more frequent flights, instead of relying on one giant departure. Infrastructure matters too. Both aircraft are Code F, but the A380 needs special two-level boarding bridges for quick turnarounds. A normal turnaround of an A380 takes about 90–110 minutes. The 747-8 can use standard single-level gates, making it easier to operate at airports that don't have full A380 facilities. Cargo is also critical. The passenger 747-8 can carry 36 LD3 containers in the lower deck, 20 in the front hold and 16 in the rear. After passenger baggage, about 26 LD3 positions remain for freight, roughly 115.9 cubic meters. The A380 can fit 38 LD3 containers, but with a full passenger load, around 16 go to baggage, leaving about 22 LD3 for cargo. In real operations, the 747-8 often carries more belly cargo than the A380 on long-haul flights. Range and weight also play a role. The 747-8i has a range of 7,730 miles, about 14,310 kilometers, wingspan 68.4 meters, and maximum takeoff weight (MTOW) of about 447 tons. The A380-800 can fly 8,000 miles, about 15,200 kilometers, wingspan 79.8 meters, MTOW about 575 tons. That higher empty weight on the A380 often eats into its usable cargo capacity on the longest sectors. The lighter 747-8 can keep both passengers and cargo at maximum load, even on 14,000 kilometers routes like Frankfurt-Buenos Aires or Frankfurt-Singapore. Fuel burn is another factor. The 747-8 burns about 3.5 liters per 100 passenger kilometer on long-haul flights. The modern Airbus twin A350-900 does about 2.4, but the A380 is only competitive when it's nearly full. If the A380 has dozens or hundreds of empty seats, its fuel burn per seat rises much faster than on smaller aircraft. Two final numbers show the logic. Lufthansa has 8 A380s with 509 seats each, and 19 747-8s with 364 seats each. On routes that reliably fill 350–420 seats per day and carry significant belly cargo, the 747-8 offers steadier economics, more flexible scheduling, and better compatibility with the global 747 cargo system. That's why, for Lufthansa, it's 747, not A380. The future of the Boeing 747 at Lufthansa – plans and statements. Nevertheless, Lufthansa's management has clearly outlined its plans to retire older 4-engine aircraft over the next few years. According to the company's report, all Boeing 747-400s along with Airbus A340-300s and A340-600s, will be withdrawn from service by 2028. This will mark the end of an era. By the late 2020s, Lufthansa will no longer have any of the classic jumbo 747-400, currently 8 units, or A340s, about 27, combined across Lufthansa and Swiss. The decision is driven by simple economics. These aircraft are expensive to operate and outdated, while replacements are already on the way in the form of a new A350s, 787s and 777Xs. Once deliveries of new aircraft stabilize, Lufthansa will systematically phase out all 747-400s and A340s, many of which are already in reserve or flying limited schedules. The newer Boeing 747-8s, however, are a different story. Lufthansa plans to keep them in service at least until the middle 2030s. In 2023, CEO publicly stated that the 747-8 would remain in the fleet well into the 2030s and would be upgraded across all service classes. This commitment is backed by action. Lufthansa has launched its long-haul cabin renewals program, called Allergies, which will introduce entirely new first, business, premium economy and economy products to existing aircraft. An official Lufthansa Group press release confirms that the Boeing 747-8 will be refitted with allergy seating in every class. Lufthansa Technik will handle the work, starting in 2024, first upgrading the main lower deck with new business and economy cabins, then moving to upper deck and first class. This is an unprecedented investment in the 747 fleet, signaling that Lufthansa intends to operate them for at least another decade to cover the cost of modernization. Between 2025 and 2030, the 747-8 will remain a core part of Lufthansa's premium offering, alongside a small reactivated fleet of Airbus A380s, brought back temporarily to meet increased demand on some routes. In a sense, Lufthansa's strategy balances the gradual retirement of older 747-400s with the maximum possible service life for the newer 747-8s. The airline recognizes that there is currently no direct, full equivalent replacement for the Queen of the Skies. The 777X is slightly smaller, and the A380 is larger, but less versatile. As a result, the 747-8 will continue flying under Lufthansa colors for many years, preserving the airline's unique status as a special operator of jumbo jets. Aviation analysts note that Lufthansa is currently the best chance for travelers to experience a passenger 747 in the 2020s, as most other carriers have already retired them. Of course, in the longer term, the 747-8 will also be retired, most likely replaced by new Boeing 777Xs or Airbus A350-1000. But until then, Lufthansa will remain one of the last strongholds of the jumbo era. As the airline's top management put it, the 747 is part of Lufthansa's DNA, and they are proud to showcase this remarkable aircraft for many more years. This is a rare case in aviation, where cold financial logic aligns with love for a legend, the Boeing 747. Which continues to earn both revenue and passenger hearts in the skies of the 21st century. Nevertheless, what will change for us, the passengers, when the 747-8s are retired? Or the A350 be able to provide the same experience and level of comfort as these aviation legends? Perhaps they will even be better in some ways. The Airbus A350 has a composite fuselage that allows to a lower cabin altitude of about 6,000 feet or 1,800 meters, compared to roughly 8,000 feet or 2,400 meters on older 747s. This means higher humidity and more comfortable pressure levels, so passengers feel less tired and dry on long-haul flights. The Boeing 777X, while built with a metal fuselage, uses an advanced air conditioning system that also maintains a 6,000-foot cabin altitude and humidity levels similar to the 787 and A350. In this respect, these new twins are on par with the A380, which was also known for improved cabin air quality. Noise and ride comfort will also improve. Both the 777X and A350 are much quieter than the 747, thanks to modern engines and aerodynamics. The A350 is famous for having an exceptionally quiet cabin, with noticeably lower noise levels than the 747. The 777X will also feature Boeing's smooth ride technology from the 787, an active turbulence damping system that helps deliver a more stable flight even in choppy air. Cabin space is another upgrade. The 777X fuselage is several inches wider than the 747's, allowing for wider seats. Engineers have thinned the sidewalls, expanded the overhead bins, and created more open space in the cabin. The 777X will also have the largest windows of any jet in this class, about 15–20% larger than those on the 747. Positioned higher, so passengers can see the horizon more easily. The A350 also offers large panoramic windows, a bright and airy cabin, and modern LED lighting. On the 777X, lighting will even include sky ceiling effects that can simulate a starry night. Finally, onboard technology will be a leap forward. Both the A350 and 777X will feature the latest in-flight entertainment systems, full Wi-Fi connectivity, and highly customizable lighting environments. In first class, the 777X will debut private suites that rival and in some ways exceeded the luxurious offerings once introduced on the A380. Comfort in the next generation of aircraft will no longer depend on the size of the jet, but on innovation, design, and passenger-focused details. What do you think? Of course, write your thoughts in the comments. I would be interested to hear your opinion. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It is vital for me. By the way, if you have any suggestions for collaboration, I've left my contact details in the description. Now let's meet in one of these videos. You are sure to find something interesting.